I'm sorry, I'm feeling really dizzy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Free fries when you get vaccinated? I got vaccinated. You're saying I could get this? These delicious fries? Wait a minute. But there's also a burger element to this? Let me check with Bill Neathart. Is it too early in the day to eat a burger? No. This could be breakfast? Okay. I want you to look at this and think about, again, some people love hamburgers, some don't. Really want to respect all ways of life. But if this is appealing to you, just think of this when you think of vaccination. Vaccination. I'm getting a very good feeling about vaccination right this moment.
This is not a video I want to make, and it's kind of hard to make because as I'm watching myself, I see what I'm going to say, which is I have been diagnosed with Bell's palsy, which is paralysis on one side of the face. For me, it's this side here, the left, obviously. So I got it about 2 weeks after getting my vaccine, and I had a rough go with the vaccine, and I guess still am. But I have to say that I would do it again because it's what we have to do. It's what we have to do to see people. So, I don't know why I'm making this video, but here's my word smile.
We're not getting vaccines. It's time to start shaming them.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
F them, their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
No, screw your freedom. You're a schmuck for not wearing a mask.
We have to stop coddling the morons who will not get the shot.
Shame on you.
No mask, get out.
Put on your mask or get off.
Put your mask on. Put your fucking mask on. Put your mask on.
If you've been paying attention the last 2 or so years, you might think that the title of this video is referring to that. But in reality, the world went crazy a long time ago. In fact, thousands of years ago. All the scriptures of the main religions talk about this, but of course they use different words to describe that time. In the Bible, it's called the fall of man. The fall meaning there was a psychological shift where humans fell from a higher level of consciousness into a lower one. And the insanity of humanity is because of this fall in levels of consciousness. A simple example of this insanity is war. Human beings have been fighting wars for thousands of years, and yet when you actually talk to people, you never meet anybody who loves war and would like to leave their family to go and kill strangers overseas. And yet, this has been happening for thousands of years. Isn't that insane? It's almost as if there's some force on this planet that wants human beings to suffer and to always be at war because it feeds on the suffering these things create. And in fact, there actually is. Even the Buddha said, life is suffering. Well, why is that? There must be some force or entity that benefits from human life being suffering. This force, for lack of a better word, is in almost every human being, and it's what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, which is the emotional dimension of the ego. The pain body basically feeds on negative emotion. Here's what Eckhart says about it. The pain body is a semi-autonomous energy form that lives within most human beings, an entity made up of emotion. Since the pain body is essentially a life form, it also needs to feed, to take in new energy, like all life forms. And it can only feed on negative emotions because they're on a similar frequency. Positive emotions are indigestible to it. So since there is an internal force that basically wants us to suffer so it can feed on the negative energy, there is also an external force which feeds on negative energy and therefore wants humans to suffer. So the ego and the pain body are basically an expression of this external force. They're its reflection in us. That's why they feed on energy on a similar frequency. I would say the fall of man actually began after this force came. Before the fall, there was no ego and no pain body. In peace was our natural state of being. And it still is, but because of the fall, we have forgotten that. A lot of ancient texts talk about all of this, including the part about a force which manipulates humanity to generate suffering so it can feed on the negative energy. For example, in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, who was a god of the ancient Egyptians, he wrote, "Far in the east, before Atlantis existed, men there were who delved into darkness, using dark magic, calling up beings from the great deep below us. Forth came they into this cycle. Formless they were of another vibration, existing unseen by the children of earthmen. Only through blood could they form being. Only through man could they live in the world. This is why the world is so insane, because it is meant to be, because that benefits the real powers that be, not the politicians and the prime ministers. They're just the puppets of the actual force that controls the world. That's why bankers, politicians, and all kinds of successful people whose decisions actually impact your life are part of secret societies. This is one of the secrets they keep, and it's why they engage in rituals where, believe it or not, they drink blood and do all kinds of insane stuff. Like Thoth wrote in the Emerald Tablets, only through blood could they form being. Only through man could they live in the world. This is why the elite throughout human history have always engaged in human sacrifices, blood-drinking rituals, and even pedophilia from the ancient world to the present day. This is also why thousands of children go missing every year, believe it or not, and why only people who belong to a particular bloodline can become kings, queens, and even presidents. In reality, the world is actually nothing like we've been conditioned to think it is. And while everything I've covered in this video sounds insane, it's true, and is barely even the tip of the iceberg.